Hey everybody, it's Jenny Clark with Solvability, and I've got another session of Freedom Friday, but today's my session, and I'm going to talk about my favorite topic, which is basically GovCon mathematics, the financial side of federal contracting. I call it financial logistics, is all of the pieces that you need to know how to price, to understand what things are going to cost, and also to make sure that you are making money. Everybody asks me what the most important thing is in federal contracting, and I always tell them, well, once you figured out how to win contracts, the next thing to do is figuring out how to start making money off contracts. Because when you're first getting started, your number one thing is to get some work coming in. And if you don't have that, it doesn't really matter. So in a lot of ways, what you're doing is going, wonder what I should charge today. And you come up with some reasonable way to make that work. So that's what most people do. You get a certain number of contracts and you start to get the momentum that makes your company an ongoing activity. And when that happens, you can start being more refined. So behind me, I've got something I call the Solvability GovCon growth model. It's really observation. When you're starting up in federal contracting, there's so much that you have to do to get started that all you can do is move at full speed and keep moving that along. The people that I work with the most are in what I call the traction mode, which is where you've learned how to repeat the processes to get new work, and you've got a steady base of work. And usually that's when you're about between 10 and 12 employees. And at that point, you're ready to say, okay, now that I know what we're doing, now that I have some customers, now that I've got a little bit longer term work, I can start to focus again on the financials. But where do I start? Most people start with what they've got in QuickBooks, and what they don't understand about government contracting all starts to come together because there's really certain practices, financial practices used by federal contractors, because you have to be what's called DCAA, Defense Contract Audit Agency compliant. And because of that, you've kind of got to follow these formulas that you've never seen, you can't find, and you've never heard of them before. So what I like to talk about today is really the starting point, the simplest point of it, and I call that a wrap rate. So what's a wrap rate? A wrap rate is whatever it takes that you hire an employee, how much do you have to cover their cost in order to make money? When people are just getting started, I say, well, listen, who are you working for? Which agency? Is this competitive? What do you think the going rate is out there on the market? And what would be kind of your minimum you could charge, and what do you think would be the maximum? And that's really choosing what do we think the market will bear. When we do it that way, we are taking our best guess, because that's all the information you have. You got a brand new customer. You really don't have a lot of information. People always ask me, well, can I go out on the internet and find what other people are charging for these services? And there's not great ways to do that. Sometimes you can go to a site like GSA and they've got some guidance and they'll show you what other people are charging, but it's still really very much a relationship issue between who and whoever you're talking to. How much information are they giving you about really what expertise they need, what kind of skills, what kind of labor categories, and what they think is a reasonable rate. Sometimes I just tell people, well, throw out a rate like this, and if they balk and it sounds like it's too high and you really want the work, then just say, but I think I could do it for a little bit less. Would that help you? Sometimes I'll go, oh, no, that doesn't matter. That's good enough. I just took a call from my kid. It got me upset. It had nothing to do with you. Other times you'll find that, yeah, well, if you want your first project with me, you've got to make up a price that I can accept. And you're kind of guessing, just like a lot of other things we do in life, where you have to, what do I think it'll be? But let me just show you, if you want to do it more mathematically, I call this a wrap rate. There's a lot of different names for wrap rate. Some people call it for fully burdened cost. Some people call it a loaded labor rate. A lot of times your customer is going to say, what's your rate? And what they generally mean when they say, what's your rate? They generally mean, what is the hourly rate you're going to bill me at? You've got to be listening for clues from them to understand exactly what they're talking about. And you have to take your best guess. And sometimes you'll guess wrong and you'll say, oh my gosh, I misunderstood what you were talking about. Did you mean X? And then come back and back into it, come up with the right answer. So I'm just going to show my screen. What I've got here is what I call a wrap rate calculator. Here's what I tell people to do. If you can, you want to have a little spreadsheet like this on your desktop at work. So if you're on a phone call with a customer and you get asked for a rate, you could answer it really quickly. As your company gets larger and you're doing some pricing work, or you're still the CEO of the company and your project manager comes in and says, hey, we identified somebody we want to hire, how much can I pay them? This same math is going to be working for that. So here's what it includes. I always put a 1 in here for direct labor. By that, I mean $1 worth of direct labor. Every time I spend $1 for direct labor, and direct labor, by the way, that's what I pay the person to work on the contract. For every $1 of direct labor, I'm going to say that I incur 30% fringe benefits. When you're small, you don't have a lot of fringe benefits. Your fringe rate will be a lot lower because fringe, let me just tell you what is made up of it. Payroll taxes, leave, and group benefits. That's how I get to 30%. When you're small, may not be that much, but that's how we get the 30. And I just do these things in round numbers. So when you're just getting started, a lot of times all you're dealing with is payroll taxes. And I usually include workers' comp in that if you have to do workers' comp as well. So you'll have basically Social Security and Medicare, that comes to 7.65%. You will have federal unemployment tax, which is like $42 a head per person per year. And then you would have state unemployment tax, which varies depending on the state you're working in. And expensive states would be like California, Hawaii, New York, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Washington State, because they happen to have a lot more generous employment provisions, and they want employers in their states to pay for it. So that would be different. So a lot of times then the next component you'd have to worry about when you grow is, oh my gosh, well, we've gotten big enough. Now I want to start paying people for when we're coming up right now on Labor Day holiday. I want to pay people for their holiday pay. That when you have holiday and you have vacation, you have sick leave, maybe a couple hundred hours a year in a 2,080-hour year is about 10%. So usually leave, depending on what you're offering, to whom you're offering it, and how you handle is about 10%. And then group benefits is going to be whatever you're paying for the company portion of health insurance. If you're offering a 401k match, if you're offering any kind of other insurance that the company is paying a portion of. Sometimes people have vision insurance and they say, well, I'll pay half. Dental, I'll pay half. Whatever it is, but that's what group benefits are. So if you were doing nothing, you were making up a number out of the middle of the air, I would make this be 0.0765. So it covers Social Security and Medicare. And I would probably add to that, let's see what that does. I would probably add to that state unemployment. Depends on the state, depends on if you've hired in that state and you had to lay people off and they collected benefits. It's going to be a small number. I think that for most states, it's about 3%, and it can depend on what state you're in. There's something called a wage base. In South Carolina, it's different from what it is in Georgia, and Alabama, it's different from what it is in Texas. And it's usually a percentage, but usually I find it's about $250 a year, $200 to $300 a year. And if your average person was making $50,000 or so, it's just not a very big number. Decimals are getting me right now. So I'm going to expand that a little bit more. And then your federal unemployment, I'm going to do something similar here. I told you it's like $42 a person a year. It's not really based on $50,000, but I'm just saying your average person you might be paying might be that. So it's called federal unemployment, FUTA. They call them all kinds of things, reemployment taxes, all kinds of things. But maybe your federal unemployment is 0.001. It's not very big. So if I type in this 0.00084, it doesn't even show up over here. Okay, the only other thing I'll sometimes include in that, and I'm just doing this to mess with you, you know, that trying to give you too many examples, is also besides FUTA, federal unemployment, sometimes you'll have workers' comp insurance. And I think that kicks in when you're over 3 employees and one of them's not, and they are not owners. And so I usually kick something in for that. If you're in a place where you're, you know, sending people up on huge ladders, and that's going to be expensive, or they're doing construction work, or they're doing something high risk, your workers' comp is going to be significant. If everybody's pretty much an office worker, it's not going to be nearly that bad, so it's not going to be as much. So this is always a judgment call. Sometimes you can go around and get a quote for your annual workers' comp insurance, and maybe it's $1,000 a year, but you really don't know until you start having a bunch of employees. It's not going to have an impact on this. And so sometimes I'm just going to make this be 0.05%. And so maybe then my fringe rate, instead of being this 30% over here, I'm going to say it's 8.6%. My goal with what I'm doing today when I'm talking about wrap rates is really trying to show you, give you a little math class on how you do this and how you make it up, because it's just as much about knowing the rules as it is understanding how you can change it around based on your size and how you bid. Because if you bid this now, 4 years from now, you've got 20 employees, everything's going to be different, but you should be able to use a lot of this the same and say, you know, our workers' comp wasn't nearly that high, it was lower, and you'll be able to bid less. Okay, so that's how you come up with this fringe percentage. The next thing that I call here is called client side overhead. So what is overhead? Overhead is the support cost of your technical workforce. So if in order for the people on that are working for you, they have to have certain skills and you have to have them certified, or they have to have a training certificate, or you have to send them to training, or you have to have them, give them safety boots or safety hats, or they have to have certain IT certifications, whatever those costs are, that's the support cost of your technical workforce. That's the work you do and anything that you as an employer have to either find or provide for them. Support costs of your technical workforce, if you were in the IT industry, might be that because everybody in your company that's doing work for the client has to have access to a certain database, or they have to have certain software on their computers to do the job. That could be overhead cost. But I also put down here client site. What does client site mean? Client site generally means that those people aren't even working in your offices. They're working at the client's site.